The bridge between science and policy is one that feels broken sometimes. And I think graduate education is absolutely critical in bridging that gap. So for me, science is all about understanding the world around us, and policy is all about trying to figure out what will work for people.
When we look at barriers to important world problems, they generally involve social issues, communications issues. And so advanced research and understanding of those issues requires research in social science and the humanities. So I think social science and humanities research is vital to a healthier society and to a happier society and to a more prosperous society. I think it's necessary to apply social science and humanities research-based solutions to societal problems if we're going to move forward.
It's really important as a researcher, I think, when you see that there's communities who are vulnerable or overlooked or who haven't had a voice, to really be there to give them that platform to share in their lived experiences. And I think that's really important to me as a graduate researcher, and it's just important to our society as well. A growing number of children in Canada are born with medical complexity, and this could be cancer or neurological impairments, many different diseases or conditions. And as these children grow, sometimes their survival into adulthood is very uncertain, and they might need palliative care. So parents in the role of family caregiver often face an enormous amount of challenges and really a consuming role in caregiving for their child. But unfortunately, our health system here in Canada doesn't really have a lot of accessible and holistic support for these families. So what my thesis is trying to do is directly address caregivers of children with medical complexity or in palliative care, and try to understand what their needs are that could be met from a volunteer. One of the ways we're trying to have a real life impact is by adapting a program called NavCare. So NavCare is a program that connects people whose loved ones are near the end of life to a navigator who will support them emotionally, socially, and in many different ways. And so what we're going to try to do to really make that real life impact is to modify NavCare to be for children and their families.
Around the world, there are millions of people living with dementia, and a lot of the interventions and program development are focused on supporting people with dementia, but often the caregivers of those people are forgotten about. And so what my research will do is provide a program to actually really support the caregivers who are essential to ensuring that older adults with dementia are able to age in the community and be cared for adequately.
The world would be a much, much poorer place if we didn't have people thinking and researching in the humanities and social sciences. Our arts, our philosophies, our understanding of ourselves, our understanding of our societies is so dependent on people thinking about these and thinking about them rigorously.
I often say that imagine a world without the arts, whether they're performing or fine arts. You know, the most important thing that differentiates us as humans from machines is our culture, is our art. It's what makes every day exciting. If all you do is look at spreadsheets and look at data, then your life would be very gray. It's the art that bring the world, the beauty of the world in front of you and others. It's the reason for hope. It's inspirational. The arts are also very important because it's how humans communicate. You can evoke emotions through music or through film. And those kinds of stories are essential for societies to act in a just way. You know, if you think about the tragedy of the residential schools, it's one thing to hear about it in a lecture. It's one thing to read about it in one dimension on the page of a textbook. It's a different thing altogether to see a documentary that brings you back to those times and makes you feel as if you understand how terrible a residential school was. And so without the arts, without film, without documentaries, without plays, without music, you cannot convey the totality of the human experience. And so you can never have a university without those very, very important disciplines, in my view.
In my research in Asian Canadian theater, is about telling those stories that have been on stage but haven't been heard by everybody. And so I'm retelling these stories, and it feels like putting together a piece of the puzzle. I think there's a clear understanding now that British Columbia has at times had a very anti-Asian sentiment, and part of my research entailed looking at BC legislation, which was actually basically enacted to limit the kind of opportunities that people had if they were of Asian descent. So we know about this. We know the legacy of the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Chinese head tax, and of course, at World War II, the Japanese internment, right? We basically took Japanese Canadians out of their homes and moved them across the province and across Canada. So during that time, their stories were never heard, and at times their culture wasn't represented. And so what's basically happened is there's a whole generational knowledge gap. And so what I'm trying to do is fill in the archival knowledge of Canada by talking to the people who might still have that memory, right? So there's a lot of dialogue. And I think what's happened also is that at the grassroots level and the community level, in Asian Canadian communities, we are not necessarily seeing ourselves on stage and on screen. And so when I watch TV or when I watch a play or I go out to a movie, I'm hoping that I can hear stories that are familiar to myself, right? And there's an element of universal storytelling that kind of transcends cultural boundaries, but it's also nice to see, for example, if you're a woman, to see another woman on stage, right? If you're a person of Asian descent, it's sometimes nice to see someone of Asian descent on stage. And if you can imagine being a Caucasian male, but never seeing a Caucasian male on the screen, that's how it might feel. And so what I'm interested in is a kind of full representation that basically looks at when we go out to the mall or on the street, we see kind of people from all over the world, right? And that's how Canada was born, right? We have a very strong English and French culture, but we also have a very strong Asian Canadian culture. And so I'm interested in filling the gaps.
Graduate education in the arts, graduate students in the arts have a direct impact on the community. I know many graduate students that are asking tough questions about the way things are. And they're asking questions about representation and diversity, about different kinds of experiences, world experiences not being represented in film, in art, in music. And it's changing what is available to the general public. And it will result in a future which is more representative of the diversity of the world.
The education of our students in the humanities and in ideas and in the arts is so critical. We need educators who have themselves been educated in those areas. The public education, such as in what we see in museums or in science world and art galleries, are driven or at least rely on the scholarship that graduate students and graduate student alumni have created.
I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm quite certain that my studies in Asian Canadian theatre have opened doors, and I already know my postdoc work will look at broader demographics. And so I feel the net, so to speak, is being cast quite wide. And so I'll be looking at African Canadian theatre, Asian Canadian theatre, Latino Canadian theatre. And in a way, there's increasing sensitivity and empathy for these demographics, and we can feel it. It's really, it's in the media, and it's really, really relevant today to talk about, these diverse demographics.
Advancement in the social sciences and humanities is as profoundly important as is advancement in the natural sciences. I think we have to understand the natural world, but perhaps maybe even more importantly, we need to understand ourselves. And it's not just economic activity, it's social prosperity, it's environmental prosperity, it's cultural prosperity that comes out of investing in graduate students.